The divorce papers had been sitting on the kitchen table for 3 days. I printed them myself. I remember the exact moment I hit print, standing at my desk at 11 o'clock at night, staring at the words on the screen until they blurred. Name. Date of marriage. Grounds for dissolution. I filled in every field with handwriting that was steadier than I felt, because I had learned, over 3 years, to be very good at looking steadier than I felt. I set them on the table when Noah was asleep. He saw them the next morning. I was in the kitchen when he came downstairs, still in the gray shirt he slept in, his hair unbothered. He went for the coffee machine the way he always did, quiet and precise. Every motion deliberate. And then he stopped. His hand found the back of the kitchen chair. He looked at the papers for a long moment without touching them. I watched him from across the counter, my own coffee going cold, waiting for something, anything. A sound. A question. Even anger would have been something. He picked up his coffee. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to me before going upstairs to get ready for work. He said nothing. He never said anything. My name is Lydia Ashford. And this is the story of what almost ended us, and what, at the very last moment, brought us back. It begins the way most quiet devastations begin, not with cruelty or betrayal, but with 3 years of silence that slowly became impossible to breathe through. 3 years of loving a man who showed me everything except the one thing I needed most. 3 years of waiting for 4 words that never came. I love you, Lydia. It sounds so small, doesn't it? Such a small thing to lose a marriage over. But silence, I have learned, is never small. It grows. It fills every room. It becomes the loudest sound in the house. We met 4 years ago at a company conference in a hotel that smelled like carpet cleaner and ambition. It was a 2-day event, the kind where everybody pretends to be more interested in quarterly projections than they actually are. I noticed him during the first morning session. He was sitting 2 rows ahead of me, completely still, while everyone around him typed notes or scrolled phones. Not looking at anything in particular, just present in that rare, absolute way some people carry, like the room had his full attention without requiring anything from him. During the coffee break, I found myself standing beside him at the refreshments table. I said, "You look like someone who would rather be anywhere else." He turned and looked at me with dark eyes and a calm expression. There was a pause before he spoke that I would later come to recognize as just how he processed things, carefully, without rushing. "Most places," he said, "but this is fine." It was not a brush off, and it was not flirting either, just the honest, unembellished answer to what I had said. I laughed, and he almost smiled. His name was Noah Ashford. He shook my hand with the serious formality of someone who meant handshakes as an actual thing. We talked for the rest of the break about nothing important, the venue, the city, and whether the sandwiches were worth the queue. He asked for my number before the afternoon session started. He texted that evening, "It was good to talk to you today. Not good to meet you, but good to talk to you," like the conversation itself had been the thing that mattered. I thought about that distinction for a long time afterward. We dated for 14 months before he proposed. In that time, I learned many things about Noah, that he was methodical about things that mattered to him, that he remembered details I had mentioned once in passing and acted on them months later, and that he showed love the way he showed everything, through attention and care, quietly and without ceremony. He was not a man of words. I told myself that was enough. I met his parents at Christmas of the first year we dated. His father was a large, quiet man who shook my hand and asked practical questions. Where did I grow up, what did I do, and did I own or rent? His mother was warmer but watchful, in the way of someone who has learned to measure safety carefully. It was not a family that touched easily, and not a family that said the soft things out loud. What they said instead was, "Let me help with those bags. I made extra in case you were hungry. Your coat is on the wrong hook." And I understood, watching Noah in that house, watching him fit perfectly into its rhythms. Its language of gesture and provision, where he had learned to be who he was. On the drive home, I asked him, "Are you close with your parents?" He thought about it seriously. We understand each other, he said. I said, that's not quite the same thing as close. He was quiet for a moment, then replied, no, I suppose it isn't. I asked, did they ever tell you they loved you, growing up? There was a longer pause. My father worked 60 hours a week so we could have what we needed, he said. That was his way of saying it. I said, and you learned from that? He glanced at me, just briefly, and said, I suppose I did. I reached over and held his hand on the gear shift, and he let me. As we drove the rest of the way in silence, I understood, in that moment, that loving Noah would require a particular kind of literacy. His language was not the one I had grown up speaking. Love to him was a verb, something you did, not something you said, and to expect it in any other form would be unfair. I was 25 and in love, and I believed with complete sincerity that understanding someone was enough to make it work. I didn't know yet how much understanding costs when it only goes one direction. The first year of marriage was the easiest. There is a particular grace to new domestic life, the pleasure of small rituals becoming yours together, and the novelty of waking up beside someone every morning as an official, chosen thing. I loved our apartment. I loved having a home that belonged to both of us. Noah made the bed every morning with the precision of someone who found it meaningful. He kept the kitchen in an order I slowly learned to read like a language. He always refilled the coffee machine before he left for work so it would be ready when I woke up later. He fixed things without being asked, leaking taps, a door that didn't close properly, and a shelf that had been off level since we moved in. He learned I needed quiet in the mornings and adapted without discussion. He noticed I ran cold and turned the heating on before I asked. He tracked which tea I liked and kept it stocked without me ever adding it to a list. All of this was love. I knew it was love, but the thing about love that is never spoken is that the person receiving it begins to doubt whether what they're seeing is real. Because love without words leaves too much space for interpretation, and in that space, quietly and without either of us noticing, doubt began to grow. On our first anniversary, I wore the blue dress he had once said he liked. I had made a reservation at a restaurant we'd talked about wanting to try. Somewhere at the back of my hopes was something simple, that he might say it, just once, over dinner, on our first anniversary, in the candlelight with a glass of wine between us. He gave me a card with careful handwriting, for Lydia, year 1. Thank you. Thank you. I read it 3 times, looking for something more between the words. I smiled at him across the table and told him it was lovely. He reached across and covered my hand with his. We didn't talk about the things we weren't saying. We never did. The second year was when the silence began to change shape. It had been background before, something I was aware of but could explain away. He's just reserved. He shows it differently. Some people are like this. But by the second year, I had stopped being able to explain it away. I noticed the particular way dinner could pass without him asking how my day had been, not out of cruelty, but out of pure absence of the instinct to ask. I noticed that he fell asleep without saying goodnight, not unkindly, but without it seeming to occur to him that it might matter. I noticed that the space on his side of the bed had begun to feel less like closeness and more like shared proximity. I started asking. In small ways first. So, tell me something you're thinking about. Or, what was the best part of your day? Gentle invitations. He would answer briefly, factually. Work. A project. Something he had read. I would wait for him to ask the same of me. He rarely did. One night, I sat across from him while he read and I watched him for a long time. He was perfectly relaxed, present in his way, and not unhappy. I was lonely in a way I couldn't explain to anyone without sounding ungrateful. I got up and washed the dishes alone, and when I came back, he looked up from his book and said, "You okay?" And I said yes because I didn't know how to say, "I am sitting inside our marriage and I feel invisible." So I said yes, and he went back to reading, and the silence settled over us again like snow. I told my best friend Kara about it over coffee. She said, "But he's so good to you. He fixes things, he shows up, he remembers everything. Some women would kill for that." I said, I know. She said, so what's the problem? I held my coffee cup and tried to find the words. I just want him to say it, I said finally. I just want to hear it. She looked at me for a moment. Have you told him that? I said, I don't know how to ask for something that should just come naturally. That conversation stayed with me for a long time. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe neither of us knew how to ask for what we needed. I tried to talk to him about it directly in the third year. Not once, but multiple times, in different ways, with different levels of desperation underneath. The first time, I kept it light. I just feel like we don't really talk anymore. Like, really talk. He looked puzzled in a way that felt worse than dismissiveness. We talk every day, he said. About logistics, I said. About what to have for dinner and whether the car needs a service. I mean, I don't know how you feel about things. About us. About me. He was quiet for a moment, then replied. I'm here, aren't I? I said, yes, you're here. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table. But what does that mean to you, Noah? What does being here mean? He shifted. He had the expression he always wore when emotion was being asked to show up in the form of words, something that looked almost like physical discomfort. It means I want to be here, he said carefully. It means this is where I choose to be. I looked at him for a long moment. Can you say it? I asked quietly. Can you just tell me you love me? Out loud, the silence that followed was longer than it should have been. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I know it sounds like a small thing, he finally said. It doesn't feel small to me, I said. I've been waiting 3 years for you to say it, and I'm starting to feel like the reason you can't is because it isn't true. Something moved across his face. That's not, Lydia, then say it, I said. Just say it, he looked at me. And in his eyes I could see it, I could see that it was there, somewhere behind all the walls and training and decades of being told that feelings were private things. But the words didn't come. He stood up, filled a glass of water he didn't drink, and stood at the kitchen sink with his back to me. The back of Noah's shoulders. That was the view I had most often in the difficult years. I'm going to bed, I said eventually. He said, okay. I lay in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling of a marriage I was slowly losing. I printed the divorce papers on a Thursday night in November. I had been thinking about it for weeks. Not impulsively, nothing about the decision felt impulsive. It felt like the end of a very long, very careful consideration of whether two people who were fundamentally mismatched in their need for spoken love could survive that mismatch indefinitely. I had decided, no. I put the papers on the table and went to bed. 3 days passed. He walked past them every morning. I watched him pause, look at them, and continue. I kept waiting for him to say something. Please don't do this. We need to talk. What do you need from me? Nothing. On the third evening, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the papers and then at him, and I said, you've seen these. He didn't look up from his laptop. Yes. And you have nothing to say? He closed the laptop slowly. He looked at his hands, then at me. What would you like me to say? He asked. The calmness of it unraveled something in me. I want you to fight for this, I said. I want you to tell me I'm wrong to feel the way I feel. I want you to look at those papers and feel something and then say what you're feeling out loud. For once, a long silence. He said, I feel. He stopped. His jaw tightened. The wall went up. He was back behind it, looking at the words he needed as if they were in a language he had never been taught. I stood up. I'm going to a hotel tonight, I said. He said, Lydia. Just my name. That's not enough anymore, Noah. I picked up my bag. I walked to the door. I should have called a cab, I know that now. But I was heartbroken and the rain had been falling all day and something in me just needed to move, needed the car around me, needed to drive somewhere, anywhere. The road was wet and dark and I was crying in a way that made the headlights smear into long bright lines. I remember thinking I should pull over. I remember deciding I would, just at the next junction, just a bit further, once I was far enough from the apartment that I couldn't turn back. I remember the flash of headlights from the left. I remember a sound like the world ending. Then white. Then nothing. I came back in pieces. Sound first. A high mechanical beeping. Voices. A woman's voice saying something close to my ear. Her name is Lydia. Can you hear me? Can you squeeze my hand? I tried. Then light, painful and institutional. Then pain, a specific, total body pain that said you were still inside a body. Which is both good news and terrible news. I opened my eyes. A hospital ceiling. White acoustic tile. A light too bright for the state I was in. I turned my head. Noah was there. He was sitting in the chair beside the bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his face in his hands. Still wearing the shirt from this morning. He hadn't changed. He had come here directly, which meant someone had called him, which meant I had been here long enough for that to happen. He hadn't heard me wake up yet. I watched him for a moment. His shoulders were curved inward in a way I had never seen on him before. Noah's posture was always exact, always controlled. This was not controlled. I said his name. He looked up so fast he knocked his knee against the side of the bed. And his face, I need to try to describe his face in that moment. It was completely open. All the walls gone. Every careful constructed surface removed. Just Noah, raw and unguarded in a way I had never seen in 5 years of knowing him. He looked like a man who had been told the worst thing and then told it might be okay, but hadn't finished believing the second part yet. He crossed to me in one motion. His hand found mine and held it the way you hold something you are afraid of dropping. I'm here, he said. His voice was wrong, lower than usual, rough at the edges. I'm here, Lydia. I'm here, he said again, quieter, like he needed to say it twice, like once was not enough to make it real. What happened? I managed. My throat was dry and everything hurt. He told me, quietly and precisely, the way he always gave information, but softer. Another car had run a red light. The impact was on the driver's side. I had a broken collarbone, 3 cracked ribs, a laceration on my hairline that had needed stitches, and a mild concussion. The surgery had gone well. I had been here since last night, I said. He nodded. You've been here all night? He looked at me with an expression that suggested the question was slightly puzzling to him. Where else would I be, he said. 4 words. But the genuineness of the confusion in them, the way it had clearly not once occurred to him to be anywhere other than this chair, undid something in my chest. He reached out and moved a piece of hair from my face with a carefulness that ached. I noticed then that his other hand was hovering near my arm, close but not touching, as if he had been there for hours wanting to and unsure of where it was safe. You can, I said. It doesn't hurt there. He moved his hand to my arm, very gently, and kept it there. We stayed like that for a long time without speaking. The machines beeped. A nurse came and went. Light moved through the small window as the morning changed around us. At some point, I fell back asleep. When I woke again, it was afternoon and he was still there, still in the same chair, now with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, looking up the second I moved. I brought your things from the apartment, he said. Your phone is charged. I called your mother, she's flying in tomorrow. I spoke to your office. He had thought of everything. He always thought of everything. This was the thing about Noah that had broken my heart for 3 years, this absolute, complete, total care that he showed in every possible way except the one I could hear. I looked at him, tired and damp-shirted and hollow-eyed from a night in a hospital chair, and I thought, he loves me. He loves me so much. He just doesn't know how to say it. The second night was harder. The adrenaline of survival had worn off, and what replaced it was the pain, the physical kind and the other kind, the kind that comes when a body that has been through something terrible starts to understand what happened to it. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the car, hands on the wheel, rain coming down too hard, and then the light, I opened my eyes. 4 in the morning. The room was very dim. The chair beside my bed. Noah was awake. He was sitting with his face in his hands. And his shoulders were shaking. I had never seen Noah cry. Not once. Not in 5 years, Noah, I said. He stilled. He took a breath. He lifted his head and looked at me, and he didn't hide it. For the first time in 5 years of knowing him, he did not compose himself before turning to face me. He did not manage what was on his face. He looked at me with everything showing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was trying not to wake you." "You didn't wake me. I couldn't sleep." He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. Then he said, "I keep playing it." "The accident?" I said. He nodded. "What the car looked like when they found it. They showed me a photograph to confirm it was yours. I didn't know they were going to do that, and He stopped, his jaw tight, breathing. I said gently, "Come here." He looked at me. "Just sit here," I said. "By me." He moved from the chair to the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle anything. And I took his hand this time. And I felt it, the way he was holding himself together, the effort of it, the thing underneath trying to come through. "Tell me," I said softly, a long silence. "Then, I thought you weren't coming back." His voice broke on the last word. And that small fracture in his careful, controlled voice, was the most honest thing I had ever heard him say. I held his hand tighter. And neither of us spoke again for a long time, and neither of us needed to. What came out of him that night was slow and halting, like something that had been sealed for a very long time being brought carefully into the air. He said, "I don't know how to do this. Say things. I know you know that, but I don't think you know how deep it goes." I said nothing, I just held his hand and let him find the words. He said, "When I was growing up, my father, you met him. Feelings were a private thing. Something you managed. Not something you shared. If something was wrong, you fixed it. If something was good, you worked harder. You never said it out loud because saying it out loud was weakness. Was need. And men in my family didn't have needs." He paused. "I learned it so completely," he said, "that by the time I was an adult, I could not tell the difference between choosing not to say it and being unable to. It wasn't a decision I made. It was just how I was built." I said, "I know." He shook his head. "But you don't know," he said, "how much it's in there. When you asked me that night, before you left, whether I loved you." His hand tightened on mine. "I knew the answer," he said. "I have always known the answer. The answer is yes. Obviously yes. Yes in every part of who I am." And I opened my mouth and I physically could not. He stopped, breathed. "I let you walk out that door believing the silence meant no. And you got in the car, and he couldn't finish the sentence. I said, "Noah. Look at me." He did. I said, "I'm still here." He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm going to be different," he said. "I don't know how yet, but I am going to learn how to say the things you need to hear. I should have learned a long time ago." "I'm sorry I made you wait," I said, "I know." Then, quietly, "I know you love me. I've always known, somewhere underneath. I just needed to hear it. And I should have been clearer about that instead of just waiting and hoping." He looked at me for a long moment. "We were both wrong," he said. "Yes," I said, "we were." He said, "Don't let me do this alone. If I slip back into silence, tell me. Don't wait." I said, "Okay. And you tell me when I expect too much at once." He nodded. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, sitting in a hospital room at 4 in the morning. Better late than never. He stayed for 4 days. He slept in the chair every night, which was clearly not designed for sleeping in. Each morning he looked slightly worse for it, and each morning he was there. He learned the name of every nurse on the ward by the end of the second day. He spoke to my mother when she arrived, and I watched him through the glass, standing very straight, speaking quietly, and she was crying, and he handed her a tissue he had somehow produced from a pocket. Which was so very Noah that I almost laughed out loud. He learned which position for the adjustable bed hurt my ribs least and adjusted it silently every time I shifted. He brought a playlist of songs I liked, just put his phone on the table without saying why. He remembered the author I had mentioned wanting to read and showed up on day 3 with the book, having clearly gone out to buy it at some point during the brief window when my mother had relieved him. He didn't announce any of this. But something was different underneath it. On the third afternoon, while my mother had gone for lunch, he sat beside me and looked at me for a moment and then said, simply, like stating a fact, but with something different in his eyes, "I missed you. Every day of the 3 days you were in this room before you woke up, I missed you in a way I didn't know how to manage." "I wasn't gone," I said. "You were somewhere I couldn't reach you," he said. That was the same. I looked at him. Tired and hollow-eyed in damp shirt, and I felt something shift in my chest. "That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me," I said. He looked genuinely surprised. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Almost a smile. "I mean it," I said. "Remember that. Say more things like that." "I will try," he said. And I believed him. For the first time in a very long time, I believed him. Coming home was harder than I expected. The apartment was the same and also different, the way everything is different when you have been somewhere that reminded you how fragile ordinary life is. I stood in the doorway and looked around. The kitchen table had been moved. Just slightly, just enough that the space where the divorce papers had been was no longer the first thing you saw walking in. I stood there looking at it. Noah said nothing, just watched me. I understood without asking. He had made them disappear. He had rearranged the furniture so the room wouldn't carry that particular memory. Then he said quietly, "I can put it back if you'd prefer." I said, "No, I like it here." He nodded. The first week, he worked from home without announcing it. His laptop simply appeared on the dining table and he was there, quiet as always, but there. When nightmares woke me, and there were nightmares, vivid and physical, rain and headlights and that sound, he would come without being called. He never asked what the dream was. He would just sit on the floor beside me with his shoulder against mine and stay until my breathing settled and the room felt solid again. One night I said, "You don't have to do this." He said, "I know." I said, "You should sleep." He said, "I'm fine here." He stayed until morning. The days were uneven. Good ones and terrible ones, the kind of unevenness that nobody warns you about when they talk about healing. You don't get better in a straight line. You get better in circles, revisiting the same ground from slightly different angles. Some mornings the light came through the window and I felt almost like myself. Some mornings the sound of rain on the glass was enough to put me back in the car. Noah learned the difference between my mornings. He started adjusting his whole day to the kind of morning I was having, without being asked, without needing to be told. He just paid attention. He had always paid attention. He was just learning, finally, to say it out loud too. He started trying to say it. I don't know exactly when he made the decision. He has never been someone who announces his decisions, only executes them. But sometime in those first weeks home, something shifted in how he spoke to me. It started small, almost awkwardly. One morning I came downstairs and he turned when he heard me and said, "You look better today." His voice was careful, like he was testing the weight of the words. I said, "I feel better today." He nodded, then, like it required effort, he said, "I'm glad." That was it. 2 words. But he had chosen them deliberately and said them out loud. That was new. Then came the notes. The first one was on the bathroom mirror, a small square of paper in his precise handwriting. "You mentioned your shoulder hurt yesterday. The physio said ice for 20 minutes. I left the ice pack in the freezer ready." Practical. Almost clinical. But he had listened. He had remembered. He had thought of me when I wasn't in the room and then, new part, written it down and left it where I would find it. The notes kept coming. On the fridge, I got the tea you like. The other kind too, in case you wanted to try it. On my desk, you've been at the computer for 3 hours. Take a break. I made soup. On my pillow one evening, today was a hard day. Tomorrow will be less hard. I'll be here either way, I kept every one. I still have them in a box in the bedroom. I take them out sometimes and read them in order. They are not love letters. They are something better, actually. They are a man learning a new language, slowly, imperfectly, one careful sentence at a time, because he had decided that the woman he loved deserved to hear the words, and he was going to learn how to say them even if it cost him something. And it did cost him something. I could see it in the effort of each note, each small spoken thing. It wasn't easy for him. He did it anyway. The trauma had a shape I hadn't expected. I had assumed recovery from an accident would be mostly physical, the collarbone, the ribs, the scar along my hairline that itched as it healed. Those things I could track. They had a timeline. Nobody told me about the other part. The part where 3 weeks after coming home I stood at the kitchen window watching rain and found I couldn't move. Where my hands went cold and my breathing changed and I was completely, suddenly back in that car, not in memory but in body, as if no time had passed at all. I stood at that window for 20 minutes before it released me. Noah found me there. He didn't ask what was wrong. He seemed to understand. He stood beside me and put a hand on my back and said, "You're in the kitchen. You're safe. I'm right here. Nothing else." He repeated it once more, quietly, and then just stayed beside me while the rain came down and the episode moved through me like weather. I called my doctor the next morning and got a referral to a therapist who specialized in trauma. Her name was Dr. Almeida. In our second session she said, "Who do you have?" I thought about Noah, his hand on my back, the steadiness of his voice. I said, "My husband. I have my husband." She asked, "Does he understand what's happening with you?" I realized I had never fully explained it to him. I had assumed he could see it, but Noah was not a man who assumed. He was a man who needed information. And I had been protecting him from mine, the way I had always protected him, waiting for him to notice, hoping he would ask, never quite saying the thing directly. We had both been doing it. Both of us waiting for the other to start. I came home that evening and sat down across from him at the kitchen table. "I need to tell you some things," I said. "About what's been happening inside me." He put down what he was reading. He said, "Okay." And he listened. Completely. The way he always had. This time I didn't protect him from any of it, I told him all of it. The flashbacks and what they felt like. The way rain had become something I had to manage rather than just experience. The mornings I woke up already afraid without knowing why. I told him, "I'm scared of trusting this." He said, "This meaning you," I said. "Meaning us. Meaning feeling safe here, in this apartment, in this marriage." He didn't look away. For 3 years I was lonely in this marriage and I taught myself not to show it. I said. "And now I'm undone in a different way. I want so much to believe that what you're doing, the notes, the words, being here, is real and permanent. But there's a part of me that keeps waiting for you to go back. To stop. To return to being unreachable. And I don't know how to stop waiting for that." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know I've given you reason to expect that." He looked at his hands. "I went to see someone," he said. "A therapist. I've been going for 6 weeks." I looked up. "I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure it would help," he said. "I didn't want to announce it and then fail. I'm not good at things I can't yet guarantee." The painful precision of that sentence. He said, "But it's helping." "I think it's helping." I said, "What are you working on?" He said, learning to believe that saying what I feel is not the same as losing control of it. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Did you ever, in all those years, all those silences, did you ever want to say it? Did it ever almost come out?" A long pause. He said, "Every day." His voice was very quiet. He said, "Every single day I thought it and chose not to say it and told myself the other things were enough. The coffee. The heating. The fixed shelf. I thought if I did enough you would never have to hear the words because you would simply know." I said, "I needed both, Noah. The doing and the saying. I needed both." He said, "I know that now." He said, "I'm sorry it took me so long." 3 months after I came home, we started couples therapy. Noah had suggested it. He had made the call, booked the appointment, and come to me with a time slot. Just presented it the way he presented information. "Here is a thing. Here is when it is. What do you think?" I said yes immediately. Our therapist was Dr. Ewan. She had an office full of plants and the particular quality of stillness that makes you believe someone has heard everything before and found none of it alarming. The first session she asked us each to describe the marriage in one sentence. Noah went first. He said, "A marriage where I gave everything I knew how to give, and it wasn't the right things." I had to look at the plants for a moment after that. I said, "A marriage where I felt loved in every way except the one I could hear." Dr. Ewan wrote something down. Then she said, "It sounds like you both loved each other very much and spoke completely different languages." Noah looked at me. "Yes," I said. He said, quietly, "Yes, we went every other Thursday for almost a year." Some sessions were practical, learning to ask for what we needed directly, learning to receive that asking without defensiveness. Some were excavations, going back into the history of things, understanding why each of us had been built the way we had been. There was one session in the 6th month I will never forget. Dr. Ewan asked Noah, "What does it feel like when Lydia asks you to say something you feel?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Like being asked to do something in public that I was taught to only ever do alone. Like the emotional equivalent of being asked to undress in a room full of people." She said, "And yet you've been working on it." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why? What changed?" He looked at me across the room. He said, "Because she almost didn't come home." And I understood that silence isn't safe. I had always believed silence was safe. But it isn't. It just makes the danger invisible until it's too late. I had to look at the plants again. My healing was not linear. There were weeks when I felt genuinely better. When I could drive in light rain without my hands going cold. When I slept through the night. When I woke up beside Noah and felt something warm and solid rather than the old quiet dread. And then there were setbacks. A car accident on the news shone without warning. A particular quality of light on a wet road at dusk. A sound that shouldn't have triggered anything, but did. After one of the harder weeks, one where I had barely left the apartment, one where Noah had taken 2 days off work without telling me and said nothing about it, I sat across from him and said, "I'm sorry. I know this is hard on you too." He looked at me steadily. "I'm not keeping score," he said. "I know," I said. "But I want you to know I see it. Everything you're doing. I see it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I think about still. He said, "I spent 40 years learning to be the kind of person who doesn't need anything from anyone. I'm only now starting to understand what I was protecting myself from." He paused. "But what I do know is that you needing things from me is not a burden. It is the opposite. It's the thing that makes me feel necessary." "Real," I said. "Real?" He said, "I lived my whole life doing things for people and never being sure whether any of it mattered to them. You tell me when things matter. You tell me when it's not enough and when it is." I didn't know until I had it how much I needed someone to do that. I understood then something I hadn't before. His silence had not been a closed door. It had been, all along, a window, blurry and difficult to see through, but a window. He had been looking out just as much as I had been looking in. We had just never learned to tell each other what we saw. I reached across the table and held his hand. He turned his palm up and held mine back. We sat like that for a long time. No words needed. But they were there if we wanted them. That was new. That was everything. The year we renewed our vows, I learned to drive in the rain again. It took time. Dr. Almeida walked me through it carefully, short drives on dry days first, building up slowly, going at whatever pace the nervous system needed. There were setbacks. Days I sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes before I could turn the key. Noah drove me everywhere for 8 months without complaint. He never once said, "Are you sure you still can't just drive?" Or, "It's been a while now, maybe it's time." He took the long way when the short way involved a stretch of road I wasn't ready for. He rescheduled his own meetings around my appointments. He just drove. One morning in March, a year and 4 months after the accident, it was raining and I picked up my keys. He was in the kitchen and heard me take them. He came to the doorway. He didn't say anything, just looked at me. I said, "I think I'm ready." He said, "Okay." Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "I'll come with you." Just, "Okay." Trusting me to know myself, I drove to the coffee shop 3 blocks away. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes afterward. Hands still on the wheel, letting the quiet settle. Then I drove home. Noah was in the kitchen when I walked in. I said, "I did it." He looked at me with that steady look. He said, "I know you would," present tense certainty, not past tense congratulations. Not, "I knew you could, but, I know you would." As in, I never doubted. As in, the outcome was always going to be this. I crossed the kitchen and I put my arms around him, carefully, always carefully. We were still careful with each other in 100 ways, and he held me back, I felt, in the completeness of that moment. Something settle. Not healed, exactly. Not finished. But settled. Like a house after a long storm that has found its foundation and realized, with quiet, grateful certainty, that it is still standing. We renewed our vows on a Sunday in April. Just the two of us. At home. No ceremony, no guests, just the decision to choose each other again, knowingly this time, with full information and all the difficult true things on the table. He had written something. He unfolded the paper with hands that weren't quite steady, and he cleared his throat once, and then he read. He said, "I married you believing that love was something you proved in actions. I still believe in actions. But I have learned, slowly. And at a cost I will never stop being sorry for, that actions without words leave the person you love in the dark." He looked up from the paper. At me. He said, "I want to tell you what I should have said every day for 5 years. I love you. I love the way you need things out loud, because it taught me that out loud was possible. I love that you stayed long enough for me to learn how to reach you. I love that you are still here." He folded the paper. He said, "I will spend the rest of my life saying it. In words, every single day, in the language you needed and I should have learned sooner. You will never have to ask again." I couldn't speak for a moment. Then I said, "I love you too." I always did. Even when it was so hard I almost left. He said, "I know. And I am going to make sure you never have to choose between loving me and surviving the silence." He reached up and touched the scar along my hairline. Very gently. The tip of his finger, barely there. He said, "This is the scar from the night I almost lost you. I see it every day. It reminds me what love costs when it stays quiet. We are not a perfect story. We are two people who almost broke each other with silence and fear and the distance between what was felt and what was said. We paid for it in ways that cost us years, and peace, and almost more than that. But we stayed. We chose repair over retreat. And today, every single morning without fail, he says it. Good morning. I love you. And every time, every single time, It sounds like the most important thing I have ever heard. This story is made by Withered Petal Story. If you have ever felt invisible in a love that was real, you are not alone. Some people love you completely and cannot find the words. That is not an excuse. But it is sometimes the truth. Subscribe for new stories every week. Leave a comment. I read every single one.